Parsha number 3, the meeting is being recorded. Okay, that works. Again, very interesting parsha. The beginning is always packed with one of the most interesting foundational insights. A little bit abstract. You don't have the mitzvahs yet officially. As they are the 613. It's before Har Sinai, before Hashem gave the Torah. There's a very interesting quote, and I'm going to read it directly from the 5th Rabbi of Lubavitch, the Rabbi Rashab. The Rabbi Rashab, who was the first to create the Lubavitch yeshiva system. He was a very active rabbi, and he said a very, very, very interesting quote that's always read probably before anyone reads Parsha Lecha, and that is, Bereshis, first Torah portion, is a joyous parsha, even though its end is not too pleasant, meaning the start of the Mabul, start of the flood. Noach, which is all about the flood, is a little bit more of a somber Torah portion. However, it ends with a little bit of excitement with the starting of Avram. But Parshas Lech, the Rabbi Rashab said, is a truly, truly joyous parsha that spends the entire Torah portion from beginning to end talking about the foundational character, foundational Jew, and that is Avram Avinu, and all the different tests and lessons that we could learn. So the question is that everyone asks on the Torah itself, the way it's constructed, is why does the Torah that spends the majority of the Parsha Bereshis talking about good things and the creation of the world end off with the start of the flood? Just include that in the next Torah portion. And in Parsha Noach, include the end of Avram in Parshas Lecha, in this week's Parsha. Why does it leave us a little bit of a seemingly contradictory theme to the Torah portion? Right? It has us going one direction, and then at the end it's like you think you were going one way, but we're actually going to veer the other way. And then as you're going the other way, back this way. Kind of gets you going. And the Rabbi took this quote from the Rabbi Rashab and he brought it in as follows. The three first parshas, Bereshis, Noah, and Lech Lecha, represent the three shifts, the three timetables in the way of the the way that the world was designed, so to speak, in regards to relationship with God. In first parsha, Parshas Bereshis, you are talking all about the way God is as God is, completely disconnected from humanity. It was God creating the world and everything inside the world. Even the end, when it starts talking about Noach, it says that Noach, who was Noach? He was someone who found favor in God's eyes. We know about Noach that it says that he was a righteous person, but in comparison to other generations, he wasn't righteous. Meaning, Noach didn't do anything necessarily special to attach himself to God. God had just created a bunch of people. Most of them were not doing the right thing. Noach happened to be more or less doing the right thing, and therefore God chose him to start building the teva. But you see that Noach had a little bit of a lapse in judgment. He didn't convince the people to do tshuva. We see different things about Noach that kind of show that he wasn't necessarily a person looking to attach himself to God and experience a relationship with God. He was just someone that was chosen to convey the message of the time, being that he was, I guess, better than the rest. Yeah. So those few sentences that we learned about Noach are fitting. They all fall under the category of the way that God is connected to the world from a godly point of view, which represents the beginning of the world, the beginning of our relationship with God, the beginning of everything, which is you need a God. In order for there to be something, it has to all start with a God. In Parshas Noach, man starts getting involved a little bit. Right? The human being starts putting its will on the world. Through us sinning, you cause the world to start having to change physical changes. Hashem brings a flood, so on and so forth. By man's action, nothing to do specifically against God, so to say, but by man's action in the world, it brought about changes indirectly, meaning indirect to man, so to say, from God, which represents the second level is that first you have God, the way it's disconnected to man. Then you have man, the way that we are that we experience ourselves in the physical form, which if you look at the sentences at the end of Parshas Noach, when it talks about Avram Avinu, right? It talks about, it doesn't say anywhere that God speaks to Avram yet. It all talks about Avram's attempt at search for self-discovery of who he is as a person, what the world is. Is there more to the world? But again, there's no relationship. Man and God to this point are completely separate. Then comes Parshas Lecha, which Parshas Lecha gives us the culmination, the true accomplishment, and the true intention of the world, which is fusing both godliness and physicality of the human being together. Says the Rebbe Rashav that that's a joyous parsha because our lives are aligned with Parshas Lecha. Our lives, the way we live in today's day and age, especially after the giving of the Torah, that's aligned with the concept of Lecha, engagement, dialogue, God to man, perfecting yourself, getting better, who you want to be, what your mission is, what your godly mission is, how you correlate that with the physical desires, which we'll soon delve into a little bit deeper. So just an interesting quote about the Rebbe, from the Rebbe Rashab about this week's Torah portion, that it represents a true joyous parsha because we could very much relate and feel what we go through on a consistent basis, which we'll delve into a little bit more. A little bit about the parsha and background. We have here Avram going through a number of his tests. He leaves his home, the famine in Canaan, and they capture his wife Sarah. Then we have the Avram and Lot. They part ways, which we'll circle back to that. God promises a land to Avram, that it's going to be a land that his descendants are going to enjoy. Then there's the war between the kings, the 5 kings, the 4 kings, to which Avram plays some sort of role. Then there's during the fight, there's the way that Avram goes to rescue Lot. And then we continue on where Avram, again, shows his selflessness. He refuses any of the spoils of war from the king of Sodom. God promises Avram children, which comes about Isaac, even though he already had Ishmael, which we'll also get into that a little bit. Then comes the vision of exile and the covenant of the parts, which is the 7th test. Sarah gives her handmaid to Avram, which is an interesting story in its own, Hagar. Then finally we start getting to the point where Avram starts becoming very much more of a spiritual character. His name is changed to Abraham with the letter Hey, but the letter Hey represents godliness. Then the covenant of the circumcision, which is a thing in for itself. Why by Isaac was the circumcision on 8 days, and why by Ishmael was it 13 years? I'll touch on that in a moment. Something very interesting. Sarah's name is changed, and she's, instead of Sarai, called Sarah, and God gives her a child, Yitzchak. And finally, it ends off with the 8th test that Abraham has to circumcise himself and his household. 2 of the tests are not recorded in the Torah. Interesting. And there is a little bit of an argument, which I'm going to read here, about what exactly the 10 tests were. There's the Rambam's opinion, Maimonides' opinion, and then there's the going second opinion, which is mainly by Avadia of Bertinoro, who has differently. And I'm just going to read this off. I printed this out so that I don't make anything up. I have it directly from the source. Rambam says that the 10 tests, we know about Avram's famous 10 tests, were as follows. Number 1, God tells him to leave his homeland, to be a stranger in the land of Canaan. 2, the second he gets to the land, there's a famine. 3, the Egyptians seize Sarah and bring her to Parai. 4, Avram faces incredible odds versus the battle of the 4 and 5 kings. 5, he marries Hagar after not being able to have children with Sarah, which was a test in itself. He loved Sarah, but Sarah insisted, being that she felt that she couldn't have children. 6, God tells him to circumcise himself at an advanced age. He was a very, very old man, very, very painful. 7, the king of Gerar captures Sarah, intending to take her for himself. 8, God tells him to send Hagar away after having a child with her, right? The mother of your child, you're telling her to send her away. 9, his son Ishmael goes off the path and becomes estranged. And 10, God tells him to sacrifice his dear son Isaac upon the altar. That's one of the more famous. That's the Rambam's list of the 10 tests. Says the Avadi Bertinoro that there's a few changes in the 10 tests. One, before he's told to leave his land, Avram is on a search, on a quest for godliness, and he gets people a little bit angry, and he's thrown into a fiery furnace, the famous story of Avram the fiery furnace. 2, God tells him to leave his homeland, to be a stranger in Canaan. 3, he encounters a famine. 4, he sees his wife. 5, the incredible odds with the kings. 6, he is told by God that his children will be strangers in a strange land. That is the second difference between the Bertinoro. God tells him to circumcise himself at an advanced age. The king of Gerar captures Sarah. God tells him to send away Hagar, and Abraham is told to sacrifice his son. So the Bertinoro institutes 2 different opinions on what the 10 tests were. Just always something interesting to go over in this week's Parsha. Before we get to what I really want to focus on, I want to talk about the circumcisions that we have towards the end of the Parsha, that Avram circumcises his 2 children. So really the story is that he's told to circumcise, like saying sacrifice, almost the same thing, that he tells him to circumcise Yitzchak at 8 days old. And Avram says, what about Yishmael? Right? Avram is really trying to push on to God that why can't Yishmael be the person that takes over the Yerusha, the inheritance, right? And God tells him, Yishmael, he's going to be a nation unto his own. He's going to be a great and famous nation. But in regards to my covenant, my people, that's going to go to Avram. And Yishmael did have a circumcision. He was circumcised at 13 years old, as opposed to Yitzchak at 8 days old. Why? Ravin, you know why? Anyone know why? Or want to give a possible answer? Why was Yishmael circumcised at 13, and whereas Yitzchak circumcised at 8 years?
Because when Abraham circumcised himself, also, and he was Ishmael at that same time, Ishmael was 13.
That's true, but again, in one thing we learn from Torah is that everything is some sort of specific reasoning. Yes, he could have told them when Yishmael was 10 or 9. 13, which we know in Judaism, 13 is a very specific age for a man. It's the age of adulthood. It's the age of what we call bar das, that a person it becomes mature enough to make their own decisions. That's why they're obligated in Torah. Keep hitting it. So why 13? So interesting enough, which this is a little bit comes to show about the Jewish people and the Jewish religion, was that God was saying that circumcising Yishmael and represents someone who wants to have a connection with God on their terms, based on their psychological understanding, based on their logic, the way that they view things, the way that they understand things, right? It doesn't represent a general type of person. It represents an attitude, right? There are people that try to have a relationship with God based on their terms, based on being their own type of logic, based on what they understand, and what they don't understand is what they decide to go according to, which path, what mitzvahs they keep, which way that we could progress and be more progressive in the commandments, what is applied to, the world is ever changing, right? So based on logic, mitzvahs go a certain path, based on your logic. That represents one person. It says God, who's going to be the chosen people? What type of relationship am I looking for? A relationship that is at that of an infant at 8 days old. Meaning, when an infant's 8 days old, there's no understanding, there's no acceptance, there's no, the infant doesn't say at 8 days, okay, you guys got to go ahead, green light, ready to circumcise, I'm ready, right? He's 8 days old. There's absolutely no logic in regards to the infant agreeing to having this bliss. But God says that's the type of relationship I'm looking for. I'm looking for the blind faith relationship, the inspiration through connection, the do first and ask later type of relationship, which we find that theme more, again later on in the Torah. God says that is the people that are going to be connected to me. Relationship based on faith, not based on logic. Shmuel, God waited till he was 13 in order for us to
Would it be that
really.
God was Ishmael would not circumcise except circumcision? Because it says, "Oy lo Israel b'yom shema Yisrael."
What was God's intention in that
I know.
regard? No, it's good. Interesting
I have no
enough.
idea that
It's
maybe
interesting.
If he hadn't, then he wouldn't have any share in that of Israel.
Interesting. It's an interesting. I think at that point, after seeing everything was going on, it only would make sense that Yishmael, even though he was estranged, would have some sort of inspiration somewhere, whether it be by logic or not logic, to try to join the crew, as we say. He was around, he saw this, right? He saw what was going on. There's no way that you couldn't be inspired on some sort of level, hanging around Avram. It talks, I mean, what the Torah says about Avram, the lifelong lessons of Avram, from everything from being a kind person, the self-discovery of his own heritage, to getting other people, not forcibly, but kind of, getting people on their own accord to ask and to wonder and to connect. Avram is basically the foundation of what it means to be a Jew, what it means to be a human being. It's not just what it means to be, living. That's who Avram was. So hanging around that, it's impossible. I find it very hard that Yishmael wasn't inspired on some sort of, and the more he saw, and then, especially when Yitzchak, got born and became of age and the miracles, he had to.
I say at the end of days,
Right, probably.
Abraham buried Yitzchak and Ishmael. Yitzchak is first, Ishmael mentioned second.
Exactly. So there you go.
It also says in
Another interesting thing about the circumcision is that the whole idea of cutting off the foreskin is a connection. Every time you do a mitzvah, the whole idea behind doing the mitzvah is bringing oneself closer to God, right? The general idea comes from the word safsa, which means connection, that a person in this physical world tries to develop a relationship with God, and by doing the mitzvot, by doing the commandments, you bring yourself closer. But what's interesting about the Brit Milah and making that everlasting impact on the physical body is God's way of saying, for this specific mitzvah, I am being attached to you, which is something very unique about the mitzvah of circumcision. That it's God's simon, it's God's sign telling us that, yeah, I know that the general idea of the mitzvah is, and mitzvot in general, are to connect oneself with God, but in regards to the mitzvah of circumcision, which obviously has some sort of symbolic effect on all the other commandments in general, but it's shown by Brit Milah as God saying, by doing commandments, I am also being drawn to you. In the case of circumcision, it's more of a permanent sign. So that's the mitzvah of circumcision, which is very, very interesting. But what I want to discuss and really kind of chew over, as I like to say, and I'm hoping for some input, is on the famous, and I'm sure everyone has heard many different discussions and many different insights on the famous or even the famous first pasuk to this week's Torah portion, Vayomer Hashem al Avram, Lech Lecha me'artzecha me'moladecha me'beis avicha el ha'arta she'areka. I'm sure everyone has probably learned at least one insight. I can even imagine maybe my father's touched on this a couple of times. And as I was preparing something to say, I right away skipped over the insights that were associated directly with that verse, because I figured it probably isn't mentioned. But then I was looking at something by, one of the people that I, like learning by on a weekly basis. And I'm like, wow, he put out a new class today. And I was like, I haven't heard this version. And the beautiful thing about Torah is it says that there's 70 faces to the Torah. It doesn't, you're big.
We just talked about
you're big. Interesting. So it doesn't it doesn't contradict. That's the amazing thing. It's just another layer to the amazingness. You think, I thought I learned everything just to know in this lesson. All the famous, each word, what does it mean, Lech Lecha? Why does it say it twice? Why couldn't we just say Lech? And what does it mean, Ma'artzecha, from your land, which we'll go over briefly. I thought I learned it all, so I just, skipped over and I started focusing on different areas of the Torah portion. And coming across something I like. I haven't heard that angle. And I'm assuming that, it's actually the insight's buried in a book called the Sfas Emes, which he was the third Rabbi of the Gur of the Ger dynasty, and he passed away in 1905 in Poland. And this insight was written in 1871. We're going a little back. But first, let's give a little bit of a foundational aspect so everyone knows fully what we're talking. First verse. Where are we on time? Perfect. First verse. Vayomer Hashem el Avram, and God said to Avram, Lech Lecha, go for you, Mi'artzecha, from your land, and Miladecha, from your place, from your household, from your place of birth, from the base of Avicha, from your father's house, El Haaretz asher Areka, to the land which I will show you. So first we have to go over what does it mean, Artzecha, Miladecha, base of Avicha, from your land, from your birthplace, and from your father's house. So on a simple insight level, which is something that I'm sure a lot of people have heard, Artzecha, from your land, it comes from the same expression, Ratzon, from your wanting, from your desires. So in order for someone to experience the first step in their spiritual journey, first thing you got to do is distance yourself from your physical desire. Then it says in Miladecha, from your birthplace, which again, another step in your spiritual journey is that you should not become a creature of habit. From the way you're always looking to grow. If you get caught in the way that you were brought up, then you kind of get stuck in your spiritual growth. And the base of Avicha, from your father's house, it says in Chassidic thought that wisdom is referred to as father. And that the evil inclination sometimes uses wisdom to get you not to do things. So to go away from the base of Avicha means to go away from your father's house, meaning to go away from wisdom the way it is used as a vehicle from the evil inclination, from the Yetzer Hara. But what I want to speak about is, let's get a little bit more in depth into this verse. So we have Avram. First thing that we have to know is that the first 11 chapters, this is chapter 12, right? Parakid based. The first 11 chapters are talking about general ideas for humankind. Yes, we institute again individual characters, but the first 12 chapters, the creation of the world, the message and the idea of the flood, even the beginning of Avram's relationship, again, God is not getting himself directly involved with humanity. Verse 12, first pasuk, chapter 12, first pasuk, first verse, God right away is changing the script of the Chumash, the script of the Torah, and he's going from general, talking to everybody and anybody, specifically to Avram. So what I'm going to say now, and what we're going to study now and learn now, and the insight I'm going to share now, again, has a very specific personal idea, personal concept. So it starts off that God tells Avram, go. You ready to go on your way, be on your way. And God's very specific as to telling him where he's coming from, which is funny. It's funny in its own. It's like saying, go from United States, from the state of Washington, from the city of Bellevue, as opposed to just saying, leave America, or leave Washington, or leave Bellevue, which can include, to me as a person listening, even if you didn't know where I was from, if you just told me leave America, I internally understand that as where I live in Bellevue, Washington. The fact that God is being specific, very specific as to where Avram was coming from, is funny in itself. There is no specific explanation that I have found as to why God said it like that. I do know that we do learn lessons, like we just mentioned, from each level. But why specifically, I'm not sure. But what's interesting enough, Avram accepts. You go to verse 5, it says, Vayikach Avram es Sarai ishta, he took Sarah, Avram took Sarah's wife, Lot ben Achiv, and Lot, his brother's son, as called the Chusham asher rachshu, as a nefesh asher asu b'charan, and all the wealth that they had amassed and the persons that they had acquired in Haran, and they set out forth the land of Canaan, and they arrived in the land of Canaan. Avram's all in. He goes and he accepts, even though it's very puzzled. He's not told exactly where he's going. He sets out on the journey and he accepts. What's interesting about God not telling Avram where he's going is that this is not the only time in the Torah God says Lech Lecha. We know if you go into Parsha Vayera, the next week's Torah portion, which talks about the binding of Isaac, it says, let's see if I can bring down the words. I just want to be quoted specific. We say it every day in davening. I can't find it now, but basically, Avram is told to take Yitzchak, take Isaac, his son, and I just remember this part. It says, Lech lecha eretz Moriah, go to the land of Moriah. That's where you're going to sacrifice Isaac. Where? Genesis 22, chapter 22. Okay, Genesis chapter 22. Yeah, okay, there we go. I have my encyclopedia. Very good. Thank you, Bernard. Kachna spincha. Take your son, as Yechidcha, your only son, as Sharahafta, that you love, as Yitzchak, the Lech Lecha, right? El Eretz Moriah. So God uses the words Lech Lecha and tells him where he's going, and is very specific about where he's going, which again adds mystery and intrigue and questions. In this week's verse, God says Lech Lecha, but doesn't say where you're going. It says where you're coming from. Very, very, very interesting way that the Torah plays around with words and hints and languages. And again, this all begs the question as to why. What is the Torah trying to tell us about not giving Avram a final destination? So the insight I'm going to share is from the Sfas Emes. Again, he was a rabbi from the city of Ger, which was in Poland. He was the third Rebbe of that dynasty, and he passed away in 1905. And the verse I'm going to share is from 1871. All my friends on Zoom, everyone with me so far? Can't hear. I still got some life in my phone, so we should be good, hopefully, for a while, for a little bit. So if you think about destinations, going places, right? We always want to know where we're going. We always want to know where we're going. There's no such a thing as getting in the car and not knowing where you're going. Thank God for maps and Waze. It saved everyone a lot of heartache and hardship. I still don't understand how the previous generation got anywhere. I really don't. I remember my parents rolling down the window every couple minutes and, are we near First Street? Oh, I think so. And then the guy would give us the wrong directions. I knew that I shouldn't have listened to him. I remember those times, but those are like vague memories. Like we used to go far. We was Kent, Auburn, like cities that we didn't know, like back of our hand. And we got their destinations. I still have no clue how. I really do not know. But big round of applause. I mean, I'm using Waze just to look at traffic, you know, it's just a different time. But anyways, when you talk about destination, I think it's just, I mean, did you whip out these big maps and just kind of trace yourselves?
I did.
Oh, I can't imagine.
Always a navigator.
I can't imagine. But regardless, when it came to destination and getting to your final place, if you didn't know where you're going, then where you go? What are you doing? Right? What's the point? So the Sfas Emes uses a very interesting flip on this idea of not knowing where you're going, as not knowing where you're going is the entire idea of what God was telling Abraham. Not knowing, this land I will show you, was the entire message of what God was telling Abraham, what Eretz Yisrael means. Not Eretz Yisrael, the location in the Middle East. That's not what God's saying. Eretz Yisrael, your own Eretz Yisrael, your own personal spiritual home that rests inside you. And the Sfas Emes says as follows. Takes Rashi's question, which this is the question that everyone wants to know, that we asked, why didn't Hashem reveal to Avram where he's going? And says, the Sfas Emes, Parsha Atme Bechinas Eretz Yisrael, right? Because God was showing him the way to, what does it mean to Eretz Yisrael? And I'm going to elaborate. When it comes to the spiritual journey, very interesting idea. When it comes to the spiritual journey, if you have a specific destination in mind, you're not going to get there. The whole idea of having this spiritual journey is not knowing where exactly you're going. And the proof in that is that on your spiritual journey, there is never an end. The further you go on your spiritual journey, the more there is to accomplish. The closer you're able to get, the more you're able to attach yourself. And if you wanted proof, it's in Torah. Torah is the physical proof, logical proof of the limitless potential in the spiritual journey, because Torah itself is limitless. You could go and learn the same verse and the same ideas of something that was supposedly written thousands of years ago and applied 1,000 years ago, it applied 2,000 years ago, it applies to today, and it will apply to the future. And not just that, for every generation, every time period, there is some sort of explanation and inspiration and message that applies to that generation. If you told the people of 1,000 years ago that in the electronic age, there's going to be this age, the future, that there's going to be cars, and there's going to be computers, and there's going to be phones, and we're going to find within this society the message of Bereshis Bara Lekim is going to apply directly to them. If you like, it applies to us because we relate. A futuristic society that we can't even grasp is going to start applying day-to-day life and real-life examples from the Torah. And you know what? If you start thinking on your own a little bit more about the future, it could be hard on yourself exactly how you're going to be able to apply Torah's lessons. But nevertheless, every age and stage of society, the Torah's message has applied. And even though you came out with a commitment to learn the whole Torah, I came out with a commitment to learn the whole Torah, cover to cover, 5 books of Moses. Even the second I finished it once, I realized, I'm going right back because there's probably way so much I understand. And you know what? Year after year after year after year, we go and we start from the beginning and we go through it. And every time there's something new that we missed or something new that we didn't learn. And the same thing is with the spiritual journey. If you limit the spiritual journey, if you limit the attachment to God as a specific level, as a specific destination, you're never going to get there. Every obstacle, every curveball that comes with trying to get closer to Hashem is going to throw you off. It's going to make you angry. And within that anger is going to give you some sort of pause and hesitancy in trying to accomplish your goal. The whole idea of attaching yourself to the Eibishter, to God, and the whole idea of a spiritual journey is that you shouldn't know where you're going. Live in the moment each and every day. Where am I gonna be taken today? Where's God gonna take me today? Where's my journey gonna take me today? Complete flexibility. The key to growing in spirituality and attaching yourself to God and getting closer is by every single moment being completely open-minded and being ready to go whichever direction the wave takes you. Otherwise, through the frustration of trying to know your destination, even though you might not even know your destination, you think you know your destination, will completely interfere and get in the way with the growth. God was telling Avram, and again, by telling Avram and being that the first time God relates to a human being in the Torah period, which is the start of this Parsha, God telling Avram that the whole idea, even though I use the word Lech later on and I tell you where you're going, But the whole reason why I'm saying Lech Lecha, go for yourself, and I'm not telling you where exactly that is that the whole idea of the spiritual journey, the whole purpose of getting to your personal Eretz Yisrael, if that's where Avram was going to, is to go inside yourself and go on your own spiritual journey without any destination. It's like when you get engaged, right? And you ask someone when they're engaged what their marriage is going to be like, what they think their marriage is going to be like. I mean, don't answer, but I'm saying it's a little bit probably different as where you got to down the road, right? For better or for worse, doesn't matter. It's different. It's different.
It is.
And if you're not ready, and if you're still holding on to that image from when you were in that peak moment of love, as we like to say, and the way as you go on your journey, every obstacle gets thrown your way, it's going to be a disaster. You probably are not going to make the destination if you hold on to it. Another interesting example, now that I'm a young father, is children. I looked at myself as a child with the way I listened to my parents and the way that I felt that I was being, parented. And at the same time, now that I'm having my own kids, and if things are different, based on the child's personality, based on the way that the world is different, so many variables come into play. If I hold on to that specific image on what I'm trying to see from my children in regards to the way that they should live life, based on the way I live my life, it's going to be a disaster. If there's no flexibility, it's going to be complete disaster. And again, God telling Avram very, very, very specific directions in how to grow in Judaism and how to attach to God. And you know what? If you even take it a step further, on how to live like a mensch in this world, how to live like a normal human being, not just in your relationship to God. To have your own personal tranquility, and to have personal tranquility is a combination. Spiritual journey, relationships, the way we interact with the physical world. God, in his first verbal, you could even say the Torah wasn't given yet, but in his first mitzvah, in his first commandment, in his first directive to the human being, is encompassing the entire blueprint of how a person should live with a Eretz Yisrael, we know, is the land of milk and honey, the land of peace, the land of tranquility. If you want to have those attributes in your personal life, God is giving you the exact blueprint on how that should be done. And that is, Lech Lecha, go into yourself, to this land that I will show you, go and find within yourself this journey without a destination. And that is what the first pasuk is coming to teach us. Not just, a lot of people like to focus on from your, the spiritual steps. And God says that there are spiritual steps. You have to go away from your desires. You have to attach your desires closer to be in line more with Hashem, and from the way that you were brought up, from your place of birth, your genetics, your DNA, and how that plays a role, and from your upbringing and the way that you were, fostered as a child, and in your schools and your friends and your relationships. All these things, this is where you come from, and you shouldn't be scared because of these familiarities that the unknown without a destination is going to be something that totally is not for you. Because God is very specific. I'm just realizing this now. I didn't attach it before. He says at the end, the reason why God was specific as to where he came from your land, from your birthplace, and from your father's household, is because God was saying that you are going to be scared of the unknown because you're so familiar with these specific things. Don't worry. It's going to be okay. Embrace the unknown. Embrace the Lech Lecha, which, what is that? To the land, which I will show you. And that is the recipe for a tranquil experience, a personal feeling of Eretz Yisrael, a personal feeling of what it is to be in the land of Israel in the Messianic times, Mashiach times, with peace, tranquility, and boundless amounts of blessings, is to embrace the unknown. Be flexible, and you'll succeed. Any questions? Nothing.
Well, so you could also say that he was asking out of the Testament that he was willing to put his faith in God, and trust in God.
Right, that was,
without knowing
so,
the end,
so,
without knowing the end.
right, so the amazing part is, as I mentioned briefly, is that you go right away to verse 5, and Avram's on, all right, I'm in, that was his step, one of his tests. Avram says, okay, and he got to, and in the physical sense, he made his way to the land. But before that, we have to get to before we find out what Avram did, which is obviously symbolic for what we all must do, is after getting to the notion that we're going to be in this unknown journey, and we're going to embrace the unknown journey, is that actually we go ahead, embrace the unknown, and embrace the flexibility, and embrace the open-mindedness. That's true. But to understand exactly what God's message was, what God wanted from us, says the Sas Emes beautifully. I mean, I personally have not heard this in-depth one before. I don't know if anyone else has, but he clearly says, what do you mean? It's simple. God was telling him to go to his personal Eretz Yisrael. He didn't tell him Eretz Yisrael because that's the physical aspect of it, the physical location. That's not the point of what God was trying to tell him. God was telling him his first directive to human being ever recorded, which obviously is the blueprint for how we should live our lives, obviously incorporating Torah, is embrace the unknown, embrace the flexibility. It is the key to happiness, it is the key to peace, and the key to tranquility on all facets of your life. And I thought, beautiful verse from Lecha, embrace the chaos. We're not going to embrace the chaos. What do we hear from on Zoom? What are the interesting, share with us some feedback. Anybody there? I think I put everyone to sleep. Anyways, any feedback?
You were mentioning about how we study the Torah and we never finish studying, and that's interesting is because every mitzvah we do, we have a beginning lesson and an end lesson. For the Torah, there's no end lesson.
There is no
because we never finish.
Never finish.
Only got a beginning.
It's endless. It's endless, and it's never. And if you think that it's not endless, the more you learn it, the more frustrated you're going to get. Because
Every time you read it, you're not the same as you read it the first time.
100%. And if you get frustrated at that, then you're missing the point. The whole point is to every time you read it, realize that what you thought was what you achieved before was an achievement for what it was before. But now it's time. But now it's time for a new achievement.
You also learn that you don't know as much as you thought you did, so you have to keep learning.
Which is the beauty.
Actually, it happens the opposite. The more you learn, the less you know.
Exactly.
Because you say, wait a minute.
That's why I don't like to
The
learn.
barrel is not. The barrel is here. It's not this little thing I got wrong.
I just realized every time you keep learning, you're like, okay, it's just never
There
gonna
are
end.
million books.
It is
There are
never
million
gonna end.
books.
So might as well be content in that little bubble. But anyway, that's a beautiful insight on Parsha that I wanted to share with everybody. I don't think I missed too much details. I did hear some.
One little thing that I remember when I came to Israel in '71. I was in 6th grade. Now, I didn't speak much Hebrew, very little. And then the next year, in 7th grade, I remember studying Parsha Lech in Tanakh class. And they still taught Tanakh in the schools. And I remember that. And they were talking about what do they mean by Lech Lecha, all that thing. They were talking that in a secular school. Maybe
it'll happen again.
Maybe.
You never know. The election will go through.
And it's interesting that Lech Lecha has come on.
Are you able to vote from America?
No.
No, you have to be there in person.
Maybe the Lech Lecha is telling the present prime minister, Lech Lecha.
Now you're getting political. The Zoom's got to go off.
So it's all comes down to that.
We all want the same thing. God willing.
Yeah.
Without the Shem. So when do they finalize?
And I think tomorrow night, kind of, they're doing now. They have what's called the double envelopes of the soldiers and stuff like that.
The soldiers come after?
Yeah, the election again. You just had one. 2 days ago.
Yeah, he quit the president. Let me say goodbye to all our friends on Zoom. It was a pleasure learning with everyone as always.
Yeah.
Wishing everyone.
Same here.
Wishing everyone an amazing
Thank
week
you.
and a good Shabbos. I hope everyone enjoyed. And we'll see
Thank
everyone
you.
next time.
Yes.
Shabbat shalom, everyone. Thank you for joining.
All right.
Thank you.
Good night. Good night, all.
Yeah.
I got to